With the program now, did everybody get an agenda from the table out front? If you didn't, there's some out there on the front desk. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the Macon Planning and Zoning Commission for the venue and for the excellent hospitality. We want to thank Jimmy Nolan for coming to speak with us about GIS and local government. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to come and share part of it with us. I have a few announcements that I want to make before we get started. My name is Jeff Griffin. I'm the GIS manager for Macon-Bibb County, and I'm also the president of the Mega Georgia URISA subchapter. We this past month we had the Georgia Geospatial Conference in Athens, and several of us attended that, and we were well represented there. We had an overall focus of GIS for leadership, and there was a whole tract about that where they had CIOs and GIOs and mayors and county managers come down, and it was a very successful event. We made some good friends, and it was some good networking. That was the highlight of the conference for me. My CIO went, and I was very happy that he did, and it really opened some eyes. Anybody else go to the conference and have any highlights they wanted to share? Okay. So next thing I wanted to tell you about was our Macon-Bibb, the MBIT Data Academy. I announced that at our last meeting. And again, the Macon-Bibb Data Academy is 6 courses that we've developed to introduce our users at all levels to use the GIS in their jobs and in their departments. So we start off with the course called If You Can Use Amazon.com, You Can Use GIS. So it's been a very popular course, and so we've had several people go to that. We're teaching efficiency routing. We're also teaching how to make story maps, web apps. Then we finish up with a course on ArcGIS Pro. So you can look on www.Macon Insights for more information about that. Macon Insights and Macon-Bibb was also nominated for the Technology Association of Georgia Excalibur Award, and last Friday I'm honored to say that we won that award. And so,
awesome. Congratulations.
So we were up against some stiff competition. There was like the Weather Channel, Georgia Department of Revenue, and United Way. So it was pretty cool. So it's a little sword. So they've got it over at the GIS conference, but it's actually a little sword, a little Excalibur sword. So I'll bring it next time to the meeting. You know that we had our first meeting last month, and we talked about the officers that we had elected and had volunteered to serve. One officer that we overlooked, one position that we overlooked was treasurer. So at the URISA Geospatial Conference, we actually went and set up a bank account for this subchapter. So we needed a treasurer. So Angela volunteered to serve as that and the membership chair, which she was already doing, and she was voted unanimously to do that. So I just wanted to thank Angela for doing that. Next month is Geography Awareness Month, and so they always have GIS Day during that month. So I wanted to make you all aware that between now and the next time that we meet, it will be GIS Day. That's going to be November 14th. If you've never been to a GIS Day event, it's good for you, but it's also a good opportunity to give back and to teach other people about GIS. Last year, I volunteered with the Savannah at Savannah State with SAGIS. They have an event over there, and I didn't do much. I just volunteered. I said, just do whatever you need me to do. So they had me holding up a sign, and the students would follow me around from station to station. And then after that, we went to the map gallery, and I was able to, and so it was fun to volunteer to help those students, but it was also good to see how they were using GIS throughout that whole region. So they had a really good turnout. It's a good event, and they need volunteers for that this year as well. I got an email about that. So if anybody's interested in volunteering for that, they have 2 time windows. You can do it from like 8:30 to 11:30, or you can do it from 1:30 to 4. So if you're interested, let me know, and I'll put you in touch with the right people. As far as our local subchapter and user group, we're going to be having a Mappy Hour on November 14th, and our events chair will tell you more about that later on, but we will be doing that. So you could theoretically go over and volunteer in Savannah and then come back and unwind with us at Happy Hour. So that could be fun. Then the other thing I wanted to tell you about here, Geography Awareness Month of November. We are part of the Macon Bibb Emergency Management Association Emergency Services Function. I think that's what they call it. We're part of that. And so every month they highlight a different area. So I told them way back in January that since November was Geography Awareness Month that we would volunteer to do GIS, to do a GIS presentation. So I was lucky enough last year when we went to the GIS Pro Conference, they had the Special Achievement in GIS Award, and it went to Sandy Springs, and Langdon Sanders actually won it for his EOC EMA solution. So I talked to him way back then, and I said, I wanted him to present. So he's going to be coming down, and he's going to present that solution November 7th from 2 to 3, and that's going to be upstairs on the 4th floor. And so what I would like for you all to do, anybody that can, I'd like for you to come and support him and support us as far as GIS being used in the EOC for special operations. So we just had to do that whenever we had Hurricane Michael come through. So that was exciting. And so then we're going to also kind of show some of the other solutions that Esri has in the local government information model and in our GIS Pro. So that's going to be on November 7th. Any questions about any of that? So I want to give all our officers an opportunity to give a report, and we will start with our secretary, Chris Davis.
Hey guys, thank you all for coming for this luncheon. Just kind of want to go over. The last luncheon was in August, and we had Jeffrey Johnson from the State of Atlanta, GIS manager, talk about asset management. So the next luncheon coming up is in January 25th. Venue and topic TBA, so stay tuned for that. And I'll be sending out the minutes for this luncheon. We're probably next week. So.
Thanks, Chris. And so next, our membership chair and treasurer, Angela Brooks.
Hello. I think at the last meeting, I think we had around 38 attending that were actually there, and then I think we had maybe 8 or 10 that did it by webcam. The name tags, if you will please just return them on the table when you leave so we can reuse them because we don't have a lot of funds. Right now the funds that we've got, when we became a subchapter, we got $100 per event from Georgia URISA. So that'll be pretty much our source of revenue from Georgia URISA. So I think that's about it.
Right.
If y'all know of anybody else that needs to attend, or y'all would like to attend, please let myself or Matt know, and we can send them an invite.
Great. And Matt, outreach chair, you have a report?
Hey guys, like Angela said, if you know anybody that's interested in coming, please feel free to give them my contact information. You should have that from the email I believe I sent out to everyone. Reach out to me anytime. I'll be glad to get you any information, get them any information they require. And again, I just want to thank everybody for coming. We appreciate it.
We've been, we have a new person from the health department here today, and we've been wanting to invite them for a while, and Matt did outreach to them. We also want to get some community organizations involved, so if you have any contacts with organizations like Newtown Macon or In-Town Macon or Macon Industrial Authority, places like that, we would like for them to come in because they're all location-based as well, and so they could really utilize GIS. And then finally we have Les Hampton, our Vice President, to give his report.
Hey everybody, thank you for coming. I want to thank Dairy Queen and Gray for providing the beverages. Angela. Also for the January 24th hearing, we're looking for a presenter and possibly a venue. I'm not sure where we're going to have, possibly here again or at the regional commission, but if you know anybody who would be interested in presenting, get a hold of me, and that'd be a good thing. Also, I'd like to introduce Jimmy Nolan. He's going to be our presenter today. He began working with GIS in 1994 when he was chief appraiser for Morgan County. 1999, he went to work as a GIS specialist for the Georgia Department of Revenue. In 2001, he became local government project manager for the Information Technology Services Division of the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at the University of Georgia. He's been with ITOS for a lot of years, and he's done a lot of good things. And thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. If it's okay, I'm going to sit so I can operate the mouse a little easier and see the notes here. But what I'm going to talk with y'all today about is some of the things that local governments are using GIS for. I know a lot of people here are already doing a lot of the things that I'm going to present. But the work that I do at ITOS, like Les said, I'm the local government project manager. That doesn't mean I work exclusively with local governments, but most of the work that I do is either with the city or a county. Everything from public utility mapping to developing parcels to training, anything that a local government needs, we've probably done it. We've probably seen it, and what I think I bring to the table is not necessarily my skill set as much as it is what I've seen happen around the state. I've seen the successes, I've seen the failures, and I can advise people on what I think they should do, as well as well, this is what happened in this county and it didn't work well. So I also work with state agencies on projects that involve local government data. So I'm kind of a liaison there. You'd be surprised how little knowledge, I guess, there is in some, or there has been in some of these state agencies. They didn't realize the volume of data that the local governments do have, and I'm seeing a lot of it, a lot of new interest in what y'all do in local governments. From everybody from GMA to GDOT to DNR, all these agencies that are now saying, hey, we've got access to this data. What GIS is all about in the local governments is increasing efficiency and producing a superior output for whatever work product you're working on. It allows people to find things, not to just work better, smarter, and faster, but it allows you to troubleshoot the data that you've got, for example. Find out where there are weaknesses in either tax assessment or public utilities or you name it. I have some of the data layers that local governments are particularly interested in. Imagery, of course, which is the foundation for pretty much everything that you do in GIS. Address points, road center lines, which also contain address information. Both of those are definitely important to your 911 call center, but they're also important to pretty much everybody else in the county. Tax parcels. We've talked about imagery, road center lines, and tax parcels, and I consider those the three most important data layers that you can develop. If you have those and they're built on a good foundation, then you can build a lot of other things from there without a lot of additional effort. So, for example, if you wanted right-of-ways, tax parcels touch right-of-ways. You can extract those. If you want a zoning map, you can add additional fields to your data for zoning and not have to duplicate your efforts. We'll talk a little more about that later on. Public utilities, pretty self-explanatory. Water lines, sewer lines, etc., gas lines, electrical systems for some of the cities that provide electricity. Political boundaries. This is something that for whatever reason, a lot of the voting officials in the counties have not been heavily involved in GIS. Until recently, I'm seeing an upswing in that because they're realizing that they can tell people which voting precinct that where they need to vote. They can tell them which congressional district they're in, which commissioner district. Athens, Clark County. In fact, it was a guy that used to be one of my coworkers was running for county commissioner. And he went in and qualified, and another person qualified to run against him. They all started buying signs and putting them in people's yards. And my coworker just did a quick overlay analysis of addresses and commissioner districts and found out that his competitor had qualified in the wrong district. And I never did hear what the outcome was, but there was a lawsuit, and they settled. So that's an important thing that really I haven't seen a lot of, but I'm starting to see, like I said, an upsurge in the people that are interested in that, in the voting officials, election officials. Rivers and streams. So those are some of the data layers that are related to, I guess, foundations and some of the basic GIS stuff. Some of the things that we also see are polling places, fire stations, schools. Some of the things that we see mapped are hydrants and gas lines and, as I mentioned before, other utilities. So, what we have here, I mentioned places, I mentioned fire hydrants. These are fire hydrants that that this county, they have a pretty cool system for going out and locating these points. They taught their firemen how to use a GPS unit. And I don't know if you know, but the firemen are responsible for maintenance on the fire hydrants. They go out and they make sure that they're working and put grease where it needs to be and repaint them if they need repainting. And while they're doing their routine maintenance, they were collecting GPS points and collecting information about the manufacturer, the serial number on the hydrant. In this particular county, that became important because they got a call from one of their manufacturers, one of their vendors that manufactured these hydrants, and they said, "We are sorry, but we have to have a recall on the last batch of hydrants that we sold you." And of course, they had these hydrants in a warehouse somewhere, and if somebody ran into one and damaged it, they'd take one out of inventory and go install it. And if they had to replace another one somewhere else, they'd take one out of inventory and go install it. So it wasn't like they could start at one water line and say, all of these fire hydrants need to be replaced. The vendor said, "We'll replace them at no cost, but you've got to tell us where they are." Well, they had this information, and it took just a few minutes to find out where all those hydrants were. Otherwise, that could have been a nightmare. It really could have easily been, we don't know where they are. So tracking assets, that's one thing. In this case, hydrants, but it could be other assets. They also used their hydrant layer to see where they were lacking coverage. So they buffered those hydrants, I think it was 1,000 feet, because they determined that was how far they could run a hose efficiently, and found out that they had some gaps, some places that weren't covered. And they looked at their existing water infrastructure. I know that this area, kind of in the middle of the screen that's not covered, they, when I was talking with them about this, I said, "Y'all got the whole subdivision here that basically doesn't have fire protection." And they said, "Yeah, we just ran water lines. We haven't had a chance to go out and collect the data yet." So that's another tool. Another thing that's very basic, simple stuff, on-screen measurements. There are laws on the books in some counties, and maybe even some state laws that say that you can't build a liquor store within so many feet of a church, or you can't do certain things within a certain distance of another facility. You can't put a liquor store next to a school. I don't know. So local governments use that a lot to locate places where you can or cannot have a permitted use for whatever the application is. They also use it to locate sex offenders. And this is one that I see done incorrectly a lot of times. They'll go out and they'll find locate all their churches, all their schools, all their parks, the places that these people are supposed to stay away from. And then the person a registered sex offender has to come in and basically tell the law enforcement officials, this is where I want to live, and they can say yes or no, you can or you cannot live there. And so what they typically will do is measure from the person's house to the nearest church. What they're supposed to do is measure from the property line where that person's house is to the property line where the church is, which can be, or where the school is, which could be quite a bit of difference. I worked with this county, and basically we took the information that they had on hand, and they had four registered sex offenders that they were going to have to contact and make them move. And when they did that was point to point, building to building. When they ran that analysis using the parcel boundaries, who would have thought parcel boundaries were important to law enforcement? Well, they are. So that goes back to what I said earlier. You've got the triad of the three base layers, if you will, imagery, road center lines, and parcels. Well, that number changed from 4 to 8. So they doubled the number of sex offenders that were in violation just by changing the way they measured those distances. Another one, Pulaski County, one of y'all's counties, contacted us through the Archway Partnership, which is an interesting program that the university has. Are any of y'all familiar with the Archway Partnership? Couple. Archway Partnership exists. They have people that are University of Georgia employees that are positioned in different places around the state. Not really sure how they determine which counties or which cities these people work in, but I think there's one in Moultrie. I know there's one in Hartwell. I've worked with both of them. I worked with the one in Pulaski County. And what their job is to know a little bit about everything the university does. They're not really an expert at any one particular thing, but when they go to the county commission meetings and city council meetings, and they're there for local government officials and chambers of commerce and different organizations like that, and listen to what the issues are, and then they can say, there's a guy at the University of Georgia that can help you with that, or there's a department at the University of Georgia that specializes in that kind of analysis, and hook these people up with the resources that are available through UGA. And it's a very good partnership. They'll call me from time to time and say, I was in a county commission meeting the other night and they need your help. So this was one of those cases. We went in and they had some SPLOST money that they were going to use to build 4 new fire stations. And they weren't sure where to put the fire stations to get the best coverage. They had a piece of land that was being donated to them. And we looked at that piece of land and we analyzed their existing coverage. They had gone in and basically buffered the fire stations by 5 miles as the crow flies. And they knew that was not really a good picture of what their coverage was. We used some tools that are in ArcGIS to buffer the fire stations with a 5-mile drive distance rather than 5 miles as the crow flies. And it went from what they thought was pretty good coverage to, hey, we've got a lot of gaps here. Now, where can we put these fire stations that we have money 4 stations that we have money to build to make the best use of that money? So we brought the parcels in. All right, we looked at the parcel, the land that they had been offered as a donation, and said, you could put the station there, but you've already got plenty of coverage in that area. In fact, I think it was right about here where they were looking to put the station. We did that analysis, and then we, through some trial and error, just placing the stations in different locations, figured out the best place to get the best coverage. They had a few houses down here that their plan was, and I'm assuming that they followed through on that, to talk with the county that joins them to talk about some sort of reciprocal agreement where they shared fire coverage if there was a fire in that area. Had a couple of houses over in this part. Turned out there were no buildings in this area, and there's a prison down there that's up in the northern part of the county that has their own fire department. Who knew? So we did, by doing that, like I said, we used the parcels so that we could determine where the houses were. We could bring information out of the tax assessor's records and join that to the parcels and select just the parcels that had houses, and it turned out that we had, you know, I don't remember the exact number, 98% of the houses in the county had fire coverage, something like that. And we took some numbers that were, I took some numbers that were given to me and I took on good faith, just used them. And I forget how many millions of dollars it was going to save in insurance premiums for the taxpayers. So they were able to take that and say, look, you know, this money that y'all paid in SPLOST taxes, this is what it's giving you back. Not only are you going to have the well-being of having better fire protection, but your insurance rates are going to go down. It was all but about 20 houses, I think. That's what I have in my notes here. 20 houses that didn't have good fire coverage when it was all said and done. And I mentioned before, voting precincts. So here we have commissioner districts, voting precincts, Senate districts, congressional districts, and House districts. So somebody comes in and says, I live at 503 Baxter Street, and you can pull that address up on, let's see, where would Baxter Street be? That's Chase Street, so Baxter Street would be right along here. And you could show where that address is and give the taxpayer, the person that's registering the vote, not necessarily a taxpayer, but somebody that's registering the vote, the exact information they need to go to the correct polling place, let them know who their representatives are in different races. And you know, of course, you could even make an app out of that and put it online, and they wouldn't even have to come in to see where they go to vote. There's an example. Devon Drive, Westminster Way. Information, we have Commissioner District 5, House District 112, Senate District 25, etc. This is also good when you have a need to change their polling place temporarily. So, for example, I was talking with Henry County a while back, working with them on training them how to use the software to do just what I'm showing you here. And they said, yeah, we had that happen last election. We had a building where people would, a polling place, and they were doing road construction on the road in front of that building the day of the election. So they had to contact everybody that was registered to vote at that precinct and let them know that their polling place had changed. So they were able to select all the addresses from a list that they had, all the address points on a map, and do a mail merge to these people telling them that their polling place had changed. Better information, better decisions. Right here we're looking at a flood zone and the parcels that are impacted by the flood zone. We have a few of them that have houses that might be affected if there were a flood. We have some that are going to have water in their backyard, but the house is going to be okay. So, and we all, any of you that have ever worked with flood zones, we know that that's kind of a approximation, if you will, about where the water is actually going to go. Troubleshooting your own data. Tax assessors, this is anybody that works in the assessor's office can appreciate this. So in their software that they use to value property, to model values of property, is called Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal, or CAMA for short. And they build these tables that say, all right, subdivision, Oak Forest subdivision is, has a code of subdivision number 203. And everything in that subdivision is valued on a per lot basis, and they're valued at $70,000. So in this case, parcels that are subdivision code number 894, $70,000 per lot. But somebody accidentally typed in 895, which is $45,000 a lot. Now, if you're just looking through a tabular data set, a list of all the parcels in that subdivision, or all the parcels in all the subdivisions arranged by subdivision number, it's hard to go pick those out. You'd be spending weeks going through that list in some counties. In a large county, in Bibb County, how long would it take to go through your subdivision list and just look at the spreadsheet? It would be a lot of work. Finding needles in haystacks, basically. And this makes it pop right out. So I've got one that has the wrong code, and it made a big difference in value. This was real data too. This wasn't anything that I made up. Other ways that you can look for troubleshoot your own data, if you will, in the tax assessor's office. So, selected all the parcels that have swimming pools on them in the tax assessor's records that are accounted for and being taxed. All right, and mask those so they won't distract me, and then I can go around and look, and anywhere I see a swimming pool, I know that that one's not being taxed. And this again was real data. One subdivision, 6 pools, and half of them were being taxed, half of them weren't. It took about 2 minutes to find that. So, and we went through the county, they went through the county, and they found a lot more than just those 3, obviously. Mining existing data, again, a lot of local governments will go out, they'll get new imagery, they'll fly, and they'll pay a vendor to digitize building footprints from the photograph. Well, all you know there is not really a building footprint, first of all, it's a roof outline. If I have large overhangs on my roof, that could be a significant difference in the actual square footage of the building. So, and I don't know, just looking at a photograph, whether, this is a garage or whether it's an addition to the house, or, I don't know what's what on that. I just know there's a building there. With this information, since it came from the tax assessor's records, the little sketch that you see on their cards when you go in their office and look at stuff, we came up with a process to extract that information out of their CAMA system, develop GIS data, and now instead of just a building footprint, I have these little components, these separate polygons, and I know what each one of those are. So I would know that, this is an open porch, this is the heated square footage, this is a garage, a little utility room on the back of that garage. But in doing that, not only do I have a building footprint that was measured on the ground with a tape measure instead of a roof outline that was collected from an airplane, I'm doing some accountability here. I'm creating some accountability between what's in the tax records and being taxed and what's on the ground in reality. And there again, this is not doctored data. We did this process for Bibb County and we did it for Richmond County. I think this is Richmond County. Richmond County found that 40% of their buildings were missing something. 40%. And it wasn't much. I mean, Bibb County had a lot missing too. Every county we've done this for, we found similar results. Of course, the scale's different between, say, McDuffie County and Richmond County, but still, the percentages were pretty consistent. And it might be something from a little deck that somebody built on the back of their house to a 500 square foot addition that they built without a building permit. That's the important thing here, is we're finding stuff that hasn't been accounted for. Now, if I just had a building outline or roof outline that was collected from an airplane, there's no way I can go back to my tax records and say, do we have this addition or not? I mean, I can look at total square footage, but then I told you already that's distorted because of the eaves of the house and the overhang. So it's really hard to compare what's in the tax records with a building footprint that was collected from an airplane because there's not really any good correlation there. Richmond County added $2.4 million in revenue, and that's the year that they found it, the year after they found it, this year, the next year, it goes forward. And once you have this information, you can use it for a lot of things, not just accountability to tax records. Oh, here's one. We actually found 2 of these in this county. This was Oconee County. And we have the heated square footage here. We have a porch, we have a garage, addition, patio, addition, wood deck. And those additions and patios were probably added after the house was finished, after the primary part of the house was constructed. And I know what happened. Do you have any idea, Angela, what might have happened working in the assessor's office? They went out, they measured this addition, the appraiser came back, entered it in the computer, accidentally deleted the heated square footage. Probably got a phone call right in the middle of it. So, and when it's not on the sketch, guess what it does to the property value? Yeah, he was paying for a patio, an addition, and a deck, but no house. Now this was Bibb County. We found, first parcel I went to when I was putting this slide together, there's a deck that's not accounted for. Looks to me like they measured that porch wrong, but possibly, we're looking at the rooftop, so it could be, we have a building down here that's not accounted for. And like I said, it has many uses. It's not just for collecting, finding additions, finding buildings that aren't on the tax rolls. These are poultry houses. And I'm talking with the Georgia Department of Agriculture right now. Bird flu is a big issue. That's something they're scared to death about. And I don't know if y'all know how poultry farms work, but basically Gold Kiss or Tyson, they own the birds. They'll contract with a farmer who owns chicken houses, and they'll give him the baby birds, they'll give him the food, and then when they come back and collect the chickens, basically they just pay him for his labor. And the farmer actually never owns the birds. So if you go to Gold Kiss, they know where all their poultry houses are. If you go to Tyson, they know where all their poultry houses are. And they'll share that information with the Department of Department of Agriculture when there's an emergency. Well, that might be too late, right? This stuff could spread very quickly. You want to quarantine those poultry houses. With this information, we know there's some formulas that tell us, if it's got, a 10,000 square foot poultry house, the capacity is X number of chickens. So we know the square footage of the houses. We can calculate approximately the number of birds that will have to be destroyed. And then we can bring in information about soil data to see if it's suitable to bury those birds on site, or they're going to have to be shipped somewhere. And we can do it real quickly. So what we're proposing to Department of Agriculture is get this information from all the counties, build building footprints for just the poultry houses. The county we could give them the data back. When I build these, I build them for everything, not just poultry houses. But then you have to go in and manually move the poultry houses so that position. They're going to put them on the center of the parcel. If it's a 1,000-acre parcel, the poultry houses could be half a mile away, basically. So we put them on the building themselves in the aerial photograph. And they could quickly go in and quarantine areas and know what they're dealing with. So, you got a question?
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry to interrupt. But this is an interesting project that you're currently working on. I take it.
We're trying to work out contracts.
Yeah. Okay. So poultry houses are pretty standard, even across different companies.
Right.
Are they always entered in the CAMA data?
They're always entered. They're supposed to be always entered in the
Right.
CAMA data. And now, what you're going to find is that the ones that are new and in production, or not even necessarily new, but are still in production.
Right.
There's enough value there that they're going to go after. They're going to try to. If one slips through the crack, it's just because it's just slipped through the crack.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, some of them that are older, and they're not able to, they don't meet the standards for poultry production anymore, they might be a tractor shed now. And some of those may slip through the cracks. But we're going to find those. And what we also did was we addressed that issue. We talked about it with the Department of Agriculture. Here's some methodology that you can employ to say, all right, it has a physical condition, which the tax assessors also track. If it has a physical condition below a certain threshold, then it's probably not an active chicken house anymore. Okay, so we're able to eliminate, still going back to the tax records, we're able to eliminate the ones that are probably not housing chickens.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you could use LiDAR to validate the physical characteristics, based on elevation, size, and structure, that kind of thing, as an extra validation.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. You could.
Okay.
So this is data that was built for one purpose, to locate missing structures and missing additions. Second purpose it could be used for locally is replace the building footprints that you paid a vendor to collect from a photograph. These are better than what they did because, like I said, it's measured on the ground, and you have the different components. Stormwater management, impervious surface measurements. These are the things that it could be used for locally. But like I said, I'm the local government project manager. I work with state agencies when it involves local government data. And we would build those under a contract to Department of Ag, and then we'd give that back to the county. Now, all your chicken houses would be rotated in position, and you can do the rest of it, or you can pay us to do it, or pay a vendor to do it, however you want to tackle that. Some other things local governments do. How many of you are familiar with conservation use on property taxes? Okay. Brief history. That is a program that was voted in, and it's a constitutional amendment in 1992, and it removes agriculture from, it removes bona fide farms from an agricultural use to a conservation use. If a person's willing to come in and sign a contract that says, I'm going to continue using this property for agriculture, I'm not going to develop it for 10 years. It's a 10-year commitment, and in doing so, their property, the land values, now the buildings, it doesn't affect the value, but the land value is, in some cases, 10% of its market value, and that's what they're taxed on. So, the law provides a direction on how these property values are calculated. And having worked with the Department of Revenue, that was one of my responsibilities, to come up with the land values. Just between us, it's kind of voodoo magic, really. But there is some methodology to it. If you follow it, it's kind of like, yeah, I kind of sort of see where that came from. But it involves soil types, and it involves land cover. So here we have a soil map with different soil types, and we've overlaid it with land cover information. So we know, for example, that this ADA soil, which we also see right here, is partly open and partly wooded. And they have different values that are prescribed by the Department of Revenue. County doesn't have any control over these values. They get a list every year and says, all right, this is how you value this type of soil, and this is the value you put on this type of soil, and there's a difference between ag land and woodland. And basically at that point, it's so far removed from the actual value of that land that, any differences, if I don't have accurate data, I can't change the soil data, that's an official data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But the land cover information, if I did make some minor errors on digitizing those boundaries, we're talking pennies on the tax bill anyway. So they can either sit there and measure this stuff. They used to do it on paper maps with some specialized tools that we don't use anymore. And then they went to the point where in some counties, they would actually go and use the on-screen tools to measure the portion of the property that's in woodland. And what we try to teach them is to automate that process with some tools that are in the GIS software to overlay that information and calculate how many acres of each soil type. There are, in this next slide, I show that. So in this one little area that I clipped out, I know the parcel number, I know the soil type, I know whether it's ag or woodland, and I know how many acres there are in each one of those. Now, having worked in an assessor's office myself, this was one of the, this went into effect in 1993. I started using GIS early 1994, maybe late 1993. And I had sat there with one of these old devices with a paper map and measured all this. I said, there's got to be a better way. And that's the reason I got in GIS right there. So this, instead of sitting there and spending an hour on a 100-acre parcel measuring all those little polygons, I can do the whole county in about that same amount of time and get these results. Zoning. So I'll tell you a little story about a county that will remain anonymous. They were maintaining two different layers for their zoning and their tax parcels. And a guy comes in to the building inspector's office and says, I want to take out a permit to build an automobile repair garage on the backside of my property. And they looked and they told him, said, you can't do that. You're in a subdivision. Your parcel is one of the front parcels on that subdivision that fronts on the main road. But you're in a subdivision. You can't conduct any commercial activity on your property. And he says, oh yeah? Well then, why does your zoning map say I'm commercial? They've been maintaining two different data layers that weren't coincidental. And the back, sure enough, on the official zoning map that was signed by the commissioners, the backside of his lot was commercial. And he said, you're going to sell me a building permit, you're going to issue me a business license, and if you don't, I'm going to sue you. I mean, he told them right up front. And they settled with him somehow because, they had sold him, they couldn't win for losing. If they sold him the permit, then everybody in that subdivision was going to be mad. They didn't sell it to him. He'd already told him, I'm going to sue you and I'm going to win. And I'm not a lawyer, but I think he's had a good leg to stand on there. If you do it this way, the boundaries stay coincidental, and that can never happen. So, I know that some counties will enact zoning regulations that say, all right, everything that's within 200 feet of the right-of-way of this highway is commercial. And so this might be an agricultural tract that's at 200 feet in the front is commercial. That's a bad thing. I'm seeing more and more counties reverse those kinds of zoning. And you start talking about split parcel zoning. That used to be a real big issue several years ago. The counties are getting a little more savvy about it. Cities too. Another thing that counties, school boards do this a lot. In fact, they have specialized applications that they can buy off the shelf that'll do this for them, routing school buses. In this case, the county was routing some sort of service. I don't remember, maybe it was dumpster emptying dumpsters or something. And they wanted to know the most efficient way to get to point A and visit 4 other stops and end up at the point B. There's extensions for ArcMap. There's stuff that's off the shelf that'll do this kind of service delivery routing. That could be garbage collection. It could be reading water meters. Anything that requires a route, and you want to figure out the most efficient way to cover that route. Economic development tool. What's the guy's name? I'm drawing a blank. Baldwin County Assistant County Manager Doug Hawkins. Doug, I think he's pretty much retired now, but Baldwin County, he called me one day. He'd come up to my office. He spent a few days with me training, and Doug really took to GIS. Man, he loved it. We didn't cover anything about editing, but it was like, take this data that the assessor's office gives you, take this data that the planning office gives you, take this road center line file, all this utility data, and he just knew what to do with it, right? So he calls me one day and says, I need to thank you. I said, well, what? He goes, I just had an industrial client that left my office, and he told me that he needed to have a building that was, or he needed to have a parcel that was X number of acres. It needed to be within so many feet of a rail line, needed to be within so many feet of sewer and water. And he said, while he was talking at the other side of my desk, I was sitting there, click, 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 click. And just about the time he finished, he turns the computer around and says, these are your 4 possible sites. And he says, you know, the guy just nearly dropped his chin. He was like, y'all got that kind of technology here in Baldwin County? He's like, yep. So he felt like it was going to give them an edge. Probably did. I don't know what the deal was. I don't know if it ever went through, but I think he said it was 40 jobs or something like that. That's been quite a few years back. But here's another thing that we're going to talk a little bit about addressing. We're going to talk about linear addressing, which I'm showing you here. You've all done searches for addresses on Street Map or Google Earth or whatever, you know. What they're doing, in fact, the FedEx guy always had trouble finding my house because he said that his GPS was sending him to the wrong location. That's because he didn't have good data in his linear addressing system. All right, so what a linear addressing system does is you have information about the road center lines that tells you what the beginning address is at this intersection and what the ending address is at this intersection. So from 1325 to 1361, if a call comes in at 1340, that's right about halfway. The software is going to measure along that number line and say, here's where that address is supposed to be located. Now, the reason the FedEx guy couldn't find me was this right here, because my house was supposed to be here, but it showed up. It actually is, it was supposed to be here, but it's actually here. And that was because one of two things. Either they didn't have high enough starting number here, or they didn't have low enough starting number, ending number here. So that way, if I change those numbers, then it moves the position of my address. Now, where would you see that? In a 911 call center. They have a call that comes in. It goes through what they call their anti-alley system, which is basically a glorified caller ID. And it displays that location on a map using either this type of addressing or this type of addressing, where I have a point that's tied to a record in a database. Anybody know why there would be a 0 on this point, no address? No house. This county doesn't issue addresses until they take out a building permit. Or actually, I think that might be a well lot. That's probably where that 0 came from. This is actual addressing. Linear addressing is hypothetical addressing. So if I have in my 911 call center, the software, and I have this kind of data, the software will look at the points and say, this is where the house is. It's going to be highly accurate because somebody put a lot of work into digitizing that point, either by collecting it with a GPS on the ground or looking at an aerial photograph and comparing it to tax records or some other source for the address of that location. That's going to give you a return if that address is in the system. But what if somebody moves in a mobile home and somebody gets hurt while they're installing it? There may not be a point in there. And the call comes in, I'm at so-and-so address, and I've got a hurt coworker. They pull that up on the points, it doesn't show up. But a linear addressing system will tell you where an address is, even if that address doesn't exist. It's going to say, if there is a 1320 High Tower Road, this is where it should be. Okay, so hypothetical addressing versus actual addressing. Okay, statewide parcel data. About 3 years ago, I started collecting data from every county in the state that would give it to me. That's been a real interesting journey. I had one county that didn't have enough internet bandwidth to send me the data online, so I had to drive down there and get it. And everything in between. Some counties that we just finished up our very last county, Decatur County. I called their regional commission yesterday and verified that we now have GIS, at least parcels and road center lines for every county in the state. And I've collected all the ones except for, I've got 3 that I need to go back and get some attribution for. I have the parcels, but I don't have all the stuff that goes with the parcels. And I have 2 that won't share with me, and 1 that'll share, but on a case-by-case basis. and one that's supposed to be on the way to me, but I haven't received it yet. This is great. We did this with no funding, and my organization, the group that I work with at the university, most of our money comes from contracts that we bring in, work that we do for other government agencies. And this was something we did without any funding. So it was kind of like, we'll build it and they'll come. And now it's happened. There are enough agencies that are accessing this data. Oh, and by the way, it's only for data that we can only share this data with other government agencies. That's the agreement we have with the counties. So I can share it with GDOT, I can share it with GMA, I can share it with the Middle Georgia RC, but I can't share it with Joe Smith that walks in off the street. I can share it with other people that I work with at the university. And we've gotten, it's kind of like, the first one's free. You pay for me when you come back. So now we're trying to figure out a way to fund an update on this project. Some of the data is 3 years old already. And this is really proving to be interesting. We've got researchers at the university that are doing all kinds of watershed analysis, and we did some work down with the port expansion in Savannah, looking at areas that what they do down there is they get these containers off the ship, and as fast as they can get them, they get them 5 or 6, 10 miles out away from the port, so they keep stuff coming in. And then once they get it to that second position, that off-site location, they sort through it and decide, this container goes to Macon, this container goes to Jacksonville, whatever. And but the object is to get them away from the port as fast as they can. So they were looking at properties that could be developed. And somebody says, well, just because they could be developed doesn't mean they should be developed, because it could impact a wetland, it could do all kinds of environmental things. So we took the parcel data and started looking at some of those things. And that was a huge benefit, having, the 4 or 5 counties that were potentially going to be impacted by this port expansion. It wasn't just Savannah.
Jimmy.
Yes.
I guess you're aware that we now have to, as a Board of Assessors, we have to submit GIS data to the Department of Revenue when we do our digest submission.
I'm working on that. Yeah.
I didn't know if that was an avenue to get the data.
There's a person that's at this level. I've talked with Tracy Thomas and some of those guys, and they said, we're receiving instructions that we can't share that data with anybody. And so I reported that back to my bosses and said, I'm not having any luck getting the data from DOR, and this is why, and it's bottlenecked at this person. And so we've got some people that are talking directly to the revenue commissioner to kind of, attack it from both sides, I guess, and try to get that so that we can have access to that data.
Well, if while you're talking to those people, because they had told us that part of the reason was for public utilities, we would like the county for them to share back to us public utility parcel information.
That would be great, but having worked with them, I'll tell you this, some of those parcels, they don't know where they are.
Well,
So,
anyway, I
saw some weird stuff at public utilities. I saw some parcels that were 10 miles from the nearest railroad track that was still owned by CSX Railroad, and it's like, why did they have this? Well, there was probably a purpose for it at one time. I don't know what, but it was out in the middle of the woods somewhere. And I forget which county it may have been, Crawford County that I saw that in. It was one Taylor County maybe that I saw that in. But so yeah, there's some of those parcels that are hard to locate. I know that y'all have trouble locating.
A lot of counties do.
Yeah.
So I just thought if they would share stuff they have.
We're working on that.
Okay.
We're working on that, and we'll benefits of participating in this. For the counties that don't participate, they're on their own, right? They won't share their data, so if something happens, if there's a hurricane coming in and you didn't share your data and it's coming toward you, guess what? I'm going to be at home looking after my house, and it's not like I'm going to be there to call the county and say, it's an emergency, send me the data. So GMA, before a hurricane, they call and say, hey, we need the data for these 20 counties or these 30 counties, and I send it to them. And we also have this set up in a data service so they can access it 24 hours with limited attribution. That's the key here. We can't put all the attributes out there as a data service because of the way the tables are related and different things. But we have the raw data when they need it. GDOT's been using this for regional transportation planning. They have to avoid certain things like archaeological sites and endangered species and historic properties. Well, guess what? We know when buildings were built from the tax records. So this has streamlined that process a lot. There's an organization called Find It, which is part of the Department of Natural Resources that's responsible for locating historic properties. Prior to having the parcel data, well, they didn't even know anything about parcel data, first of all. They would go to the Q Public site and they'd click on and see different things, and they finally said, hey, you know, it would be nice if we had this in a way that we could search it in a GIS-friendly format. So they're using this data extensively for finding historic properties, which really means, I was surprised. The house I lived in was built in 1976, and it's almost historic, 50 years old. Everything is more than 50 years old. So houses, brick ranches built in the 60s are historic property. Oh wait, I've got a couple of other points here. U.S. Forest Service, when the Okefenokee catches fire, I get calls. Have you got data for Clinch County? Have you got data for Ware County? Yeah, I've got it. Economic Development, Georgia Department of Economic Development is using this data. They could be using it more, but they are actually, I do get a call from them from time to time. And right now we don't have an agreement with the counties. When I say it can be shared with other government agencies, I can sell it. Our agreement with the counties is we can share with regional commissions, University of Georgia system, which means all the, not just UGA, but Georgia Southern, and we can share it with all these different university system divisions, state agencies and federal agencies. So FEMA could have access to it, GDOT could have access to it, Brent could have access to it, but I can't share Bibb County's data with Houston County. And we're hoping to overcome that, because I've had several counties that said, you know, I'd like to have access to my neighboring counties. We had one county that told us, we'll share that data with you, but don't give it to that city we don't like. So, you know, we had to put that in place in order to get cooperation. Got a call, I don't know if y'all remember, January of 2017, a tornado hit Worth County down in Sylvester, Georgia, outside of town. Early January, and before the month was over, they got hit a second time by a tornado. This was the second tornado path. I had their data. I get a call from the chief appraiser there and says, I'm going to send you what FEMA gave us as the storm path. And we want I think it was a 1 mile buffer, or a half-mile buffer. And we want to know which parcels have structures on them that we need to go visit to see if they were destroyed or damaged. And in 30 minutes, they had PDF files that they could print out of these maps that they could take out in the field. And that way they didn't waste their time going to every parcel. They just went to the ones that they knew had structures. There again, if they were built without a building permit, they might have got omitted. Okefenokee on fire. That's just a picture there. Hazard mitigation. This is another big one. How are we doing on time?
10 more minutes.
All right, I'll speed it up a little bit. Hazard mitigation planning. This is something that every county has to have a hazard mitigation plan. Part of that plan is identifying structures that are in a flood zone. This software will take information from the assessor's records and information from historic flooding events, and then you add elevation data, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And not only do I know that this house is in a flood zone, but I know it's going to have this much water in the living room, or this much water in the living room. And there's historic information that says if it's got a frame foundation and if it's got a slab foundation and it's frame wood construction, and there's this much water, it's going to suffer this much percentage damage. If it's masonry and with a pier foundation, it's going to suffer a little bit less damage at the same water level. And at this water level, this is how much damage it's going to suffer. And we can estimate the damages in terms of dollars. And we can also estimate how much debris has to be hauled out after the fact. So here's some of the results. Total exposure, total losses. So this is the total value of all the buildings that are, let me make sure I'm reading this right, that are in that jurisdiction. And this is the amount of damage in thousands, 44, so that number, $4,492,000 in damage. And there again, this is in the unincorporated area, the others were in the city boundaries. The elevation data that we use to determine how much water is in the living room, and that's in that scenario, comes from something called LIDAR. Who's familiar with LIDAR? Everybody in here? Okay. This is the LIDAR is used to rectify imagery so that we have accurate measurements on screen. This is an example of some imagery that was, some data that was built on top of imagery in a county that has relatively good, a pretty good bit of change in terrain. And they went out and they had this, they had a flight done in early 2000s. They built all this data, their parcels, their road center lines, and then they got good imagery. They got some elevation, some LIDAR, and got good elevation surface to rectify their photography. This is actual data. They came to me and said, stuff's not lining up. I said, that's because you have bad data, bad imagery as a foundation. And, you know, a poultry house is typically about 300 feet long. I guess that's 200 feet difference. The yellow line is where the property boundary is supposed to be. The blue line is the way they had it drawn. And the blue line looked good on their old photography. 200 feet off. Whoops. Another thing that counties are doing with that LIDAR data, building contours. So I had one county that took their elevation data, built contours off of it, and then they clipped the contours to the parcel boundaries. And they were able to measure the high and low, the minimum and maximum elevation, and very quickly determine on small parcels where they might have a topography problem. And then they went and looked at those, because this is a pretty steep slope on the front of that parcel. And that's a 1 acre parcel. There are 64 feet in fall on a 1 acre parcel. That's probably a topography problem. What we're hearing some talk, I haven't actually seen a lot of activity with this, but doing some things that are like modeling transportation, looking at transportation planning and different things that they can do with the LIDAR. And this is where we are. I was asked earlier about where what the schedules were for getting new LIDAR. We have a few counties that don't have any LIDAR yet. And this is a really cool story. I had a vendor that I talked with at a conference, and he was telling me about the work that they were doing with Natural Resources Conservation Service in Mississippi. This is an imagery vendor. And I said, well, you know, I've got a friend at NRCS in Athens. He and I go back to the early 1980s. We're buddies. And I could tell some war stories too. But his name's Joe Perry, and I'm not talking about the guitar player for Aerosmith either. But his name's Joe Perry, and he would call me from time to time, say, man, we've got some surplus money in our budget. Where would be a good place to spend that money on LIDAR? And we'd talk about it, we'd make some plans, and then the money disappeared. We did that like 3 years in a row. And so this vendor and I were talking at a conference, and I said, he told me where they were getting the money from, and I called Joe, and I said, do y'all have access to this same pot of money? He said, yeah. I said, well, we need to build some LIDAR. And he said, we can't spend that money on LIDAR. It's earmarked for vehicles and different things. I said, well, then how come Mississippi can use that same money? Well, I didn't know they were doing that. So he started checking. Sure enough, they had a big pot of money to develop LIDAR. So he got a new boss who was real technically savvy, and she really has lit a fire under things. We got the ball rolling, and then Susan Miller came on board as the GIO, and she's kind of taken over that role. And we've applied for grants from the U.S. Geological Survey. Those grants require matching funds, which then we were able to take the NRCS money and leverage that to get additional funds from USGS. And since 2015, all of this has been developed, all of through those grants. It was a multi-year project. And Tina Jerome at NRCS has told me, she said, we're going to have this done within the next couple of years for the whole state. In fact, if you see here, we've got some that were flown in 13 and then again in 18, several of those. We're starting back and going back through and kind of looking at identifying the areas where there needs to be a reflight, which y'all should be qualified for, I would say probably in 2020. Color infrared imagery. You've got the 3 bands, red, green, and blue, and then you have the color infrared band, which typically local governments didn't know a whole lot about, Rick, to be honest with you. And if they did know about it, they were like, well, what could we use that for? Well, the near infrared band is real sensitive to changes in chlorophyll. So foresters, people in the forestry industry, like to have that data. What we're talking to I've talked to some of the counties and I said, a good vendor, they're going to collect that anyway. Their camera's set up to collect it. They just don't, it's not specified as a deliverable, so they just don't deliver it. It's sitting, it's still sitting on a shelf somewhere. What I've been advising local governments to do is when you fly, go ahead and put that in the contract. And because it's a reputable vendor, they're not going to charge you any more for it. Then you might be able to go to the timber companies and say, hey, we're going to fly, but we really could use an extra $5,000. There might be some opportunities there. Where if you don't have to see out of the near infrared band, they're going to say, so what? We need that. Custom imagery flights. The big innovation is we've finally gotten to the point where we're getting large numbers of counties to fly at the same time. And because of the economy of scale, the fact that they don't have to do as many the vendor doesn't have to incur as many staging costs. They can go into an area and fly 5 counties. We're seeing some really good prices. Not only industry-wide is the price going down, but the coordination is driving it down even further. Faith Bryan at the Georgia Mountains RC has probably led the pack on that, I would say. Mm-hmm. We had some earlier multi-county projects down in southwest Georgia that I was part of back in the mid-2000s, but that's been something that Faith's kind of taken on as her thing, and she's gotten really good at it too. So if you're thinking about flying, contact Faith. Contact Brent and then contact Faith. They have to have some sort of interagency agreement, I think. The statewide imagery. If you haven't heard about this, this is available to all government agencies in the state of Georgia. 6-inch pixels for the entire state. Some of it's leaf on, some of it's leaf off. Most of it's leaf off. And it was mostly flown from about this time last year until February or April, I guess. Mm-hmm. And it's available for free. It's an image service. You can't actually get a copy of the data. And I just got word here, Brent confirmed today, and I had heard a couple of days ago that they're now going to be able to use this on their public-facing websites like QPublic. Talk about CAMA a little bit. WinGap is the predominant CAMA. WinGap's an interesting story. Crisp County and Dooley County, back in the late 1980s, when counties were first starting to get on computers for their tax assessment, went to the Department of Revenue. And they said, these big counties are going out and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these mainframe computers, AS400s and Unix boxes, and buying this expensive CAMA software that we can't afford. Can you help us out? And the Department of Revenue said, we started a project like that back in the early 80s, but funding got cut, and we still have the original code, so y'all can take that and do whatever you want with it. And they took it, they contracted with some people to develop something called GAP, the Georgia Appraisal Program. It was a DOS application. At first, it was better than nothing. It wasn't that great, but it was better than nothing. And they took, each county contributed, I think it was $1,000, and they paid this programmer, this application developer, to finish writing it out. And other counties that didn't have the money for a CAMA system saw it. They said, hey, we'll contribute $1,000 if we can have a copy of that. And they did. And then there was more money for development. And the more counties that came on, the more money they had, the better the software got. And then the better the software got, the more counties that were attracted to it. So it's, it's built into what it is today. From Crisp and Dooley County to 144 counties now using the same software. That's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why Jim Locker was on the Lynn County.
Yep. And he was one of the first ones that started it. We have a couple here. Biotech. I don't see them really lasting. We've had some other CAMA vendors that have, unfortunately, they didn't get with the program. They were still using old technology. They didn't update their software, and WinGap became very attractive to their clients. And they either don't do business in Georgia anymore, or they've gone out of business. Some of these counties, I don't know that they will ever see them. DeKalb, Fulton, Cobb, I don't know if we'll ever see them on WinGap. But that's okay. The majority of them are. We can adapt to those. And that's it. That's all I have, unless there are a lot of questions. Or any questions?
Questions for Jimmy?
Well, I have a couple.
Okay.
Going back to your parcel data set statewide, which is wonderful. Great effort. I was aware of your efforts there for a while. One of the things that I think is a challenge besides the maintenance and update of that data is going to be, because there is a lack of a cadastral standard in the state, you're going to have in essence 159 parcel data sets that were developed to different standards and methodologies and maintained likewise. So when you do a multi-county analysis along political boundaries, along county boundaries, you are going to see some perimeter edge matching issues, a lot of edge matching issues. So first question is, have you guys considered, and I think I know the answer to this, doing any of that edge matching? It would almost be impossible. And two, I think maybe that must flavor how the continuity of a multi-county analysis is put together, because you're going to have some mismatches on county boundaries around the peripheries. So
There are a lot of issues there, and as you're well aware, a lot of counties don't really know where their boundaries are, unless there's a river or something, that's tangible.
And those change. Yeah.
Those change, and then there are, so that's an issue, not knowing where they really are.
Yep.
Trying to edge match those might expose some things that people don't want to expose.
It will. Yeah.
And you have the issue of County A flying with vendor A and County B flying with vendor B, and imagery doesn't match up. So then anything they build on top of that imagery is not going to match. And on top of that, it's just a monumental task, and nobody's willing to write a check to pay for it.
Yeah.
So that's going to be something for these younger people to tackle in 10 years when you and I are retired.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's an important task. I think that someday it may be on the front and center. But right now it's just collect the data, and if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. So.
Right.
We find if you don't have a river for your boundary, if you put a large retailer there, that helps.
That does help, yeah. You need a couple of ferry crossings there, don't you?
Thank you, Jimmy.
You're welcome.
All right. A couple of more announcements before we wrap up. We have our next Middle Georgia user group meeting is actually at 2 o'clock today. So anybody that wants to stay for that, we're going to have a roundtable discussion with some of our other departments and some of our other users. And then after that, we're going to have one coming up at November 29th, which is the week after Thanksgiving. That's the next user group meeting. And as Les mentioned, the next subchapter luncheon is January 25th. And we are still determining the location.
Thursday?
Yeah, Thursday.
24.
Yeah, 24th. January 24th. Looked at my old calendar when I wrote that down. So, good catch. And then we have one more chair report, and our newest chair is our events chair, which is Sandra Yates, and she's going to tell us about our events that are coming up.
Well, socializing after hours is really, we all need it to kind of unwind and to best practice conversation and to network. Our next one is going to be November the 14th at Piedmont Brewery at 450 3rd Street here in Macon. They said, come on in. They have some fall different beer that they would love to share and for us to taste. It's going to be from 5:30 to 7:30. So just come on out and be with us.
And we'll send out a reminder as that gets a little bit closer. But we'd love to see you all out there. We had a Mappy hour there one time before, and it was very enjoyable. They have all these different types of beer, and if you don't like beer like me, they have a full bar as well. So, and they have soda. So, all right, thank you for coming, and hope to see you next time.
All right.
Bring a friend.